Hello and welcome to this first in potentially a series of videos to add some supplemental information for classes that I teach for in-person instructor-led Lean Six Sigma training and specifically around the various methods of business process improvement. This first module is going to focus on the SIPOC diagram. So for those of you who may be new to the Six Sigma side of Lean Six Sigma, I want to just spend a moment and cover kind of the model that is taught to traditional yellow belts, green belts, and black belts. And that's what's typically referred to as the DMAIC, and the letters represent the 5 stages that a team typically uses to address some type of process improvement initiative. First phase is the define phase, then we have the measure phase, analyze, improve, and control phases. However, I wanted to share with you something that I've learned throughout my training, that in the early days of Six Sigma, there was no define phase. In those first years of building and developing the Six Sigma methodology, they had just a 4-step process to measure, analyze, improve, and control. But teams and then other companies that started to adopt this after Motorola's initiation in this approach, they started realizing they were fixing and improving the wrong things. Wrong being the customer doesn't really care about that, or investors or the top leaders of the company don't really care about those specific things. And yes, they care, but in the sense that don't care because it's not connected to what the customer wants or to those top level goals and objectives. So the define phase was created to address those gaps and to ensure that Six Sigma projects, Kaizen events, those kind of things had some direct linkage to those focal points. And so that's where we see things like the charter was developed to explain the problem definition and using the 5W kind of 1H approach. Voice of the customer, really understanding the customer's needs versus the customer wants and making sure those are clear. And then again, the strategy. So while we're focusing on this year's goals and objectives, there should be some 3 to 5 year plan that this year's focus is linked to, and then our projects should have some connection with those corporate goals and plans, and even things like investor relations and customer impact, those kind of things. So before jumping into the SIPOC, we need to kind of look at a process at the most fundamental view. Some people refer to this as the IPO diagram, as you can see from the highlights in this diagram. Some refer to it as a level 0 process, the most fundamental view of a process, where we just look at the inputs and we look at the outputs. And so this will build the essence of a SIPOC. So if I continue on here, if I look at a process, and the P in the SIPOC comes from process, and then in our box we can put some type of process details, the title, some description, etc. Then we start to add the inputs and the outputs. I have these listed as key, or you could say critical, because we know there may be many input variables and maybe even many output variables. But at this super broad view, I want to focus on those key inputs, those 6, 7, 8 inputs, and the same thing with the output variables. Then our inputs and outputs have the S and the C in the SIPOC. So suppliers provide us the input variables, and then our customers are those who consume those output variables. And there you have the most basic view of a SIPOC diagram. And then often teams might add just a little bit of extra detail and add 4, 5, 6 steps in the process. These are not meant to train and actually be able to do the process, but just process understanding, those 6 steps. We would have to add much more detail for someone to actually do the step-by-step process requirements. So like many of you, I learn best by seeing an example. So here is an example of changing a flat tire. So then that's the name of the process, changing a flat tire. So I have some inputs and outputs. Some of the inputs might be the jack, of course. I need that tool to jack up the car. I need the spare tire to swap out. I need the lug nut wrench to loosen the lug nuts to remove the old tire. And I need to know the jack point. I could add another input variable such as the owner's manual that tells me the process and where the jack point is and those kind of things. And then the output variables might be some cycle time. Hey, the average person, maybe who knows how to change a tire, might be able to do it in 15 minutes. Maybe not, maybe it's longer. And then another key output variable might be that the lug nuts are properly tightened, so we have a good, safe, secure attachment of the new tire. So where the inputs come from, the car manufacturer, where he provides the tools and the process, and of course the driver is the person doing the inputs and the process. So I might actually I might want to list the driver as an input variable because it's not a robot. There is a required needed variable called the person who's jacking up the car. And then the consumer of the output variables, again, is the driver, and then perhaps maybe the passengers. And you can see we could just say maybe in 5 or 6 steps, here's the steps to actually change the flat tire. And so I say again, there's not enough detail here to actually go do it, but it's to understand the process. We could add 8 or 10 more steps or even more for that step-by-step process to get the tools, jack the car up, and do that whole process. So here's a business process. Most of us, I think, in our businesses want to get paid. So there is typically an invoicing process that we use to send invoices to our customers so they know how much they owe us for the goods or the services that we provided. So some input variables might be, of course, the order details, the quantity and the things they ordered, the pricing. Like our previous example, I need a person, unless this is an automated process, I need a person to do the invoicing process. So I might have my accounts receivables team member. I might be accessing the ordering system, the ERP system. I might be accessing my accounts receivable standard operating procedure that tells me exactly what to do. And then the output variables might be a quality metric. Maybe currently, or the expectation is that 98% are done correct the first time without any extra rework and those kind of things. So I could also list, maybe if that's the process quality goal, then the current state might be 90%, because I'm actually mapping the current state as it is. And so quality might be one of the reasons why I'm looking at this process in the first place. Cycle time might be another item. Maybe the average invoice should take 10 minutes, but maybe today the average invoice takes 15 or 20. So I would want to capture those output variables, the target and the actual current state, to explain what's happening today. And I may get some type of confirmation message, let's say. So the suppliers for the input variables, well, the AR team members come from finance. The customer is the one that's actually placed the order, so the order details and those kind of things come from the customer. Maybe the sales representative might provide some key variables. And of course, the customer service department who took the order. All those feed into these various input variables. And then the customers, of course, we have the internal customers, the finance team, because the more you invoice, the better chances of us collecting money, feeding our revenue, feeding a downstream metric like day sales outstanding and those kind of things. And of course, the external customer, the person or group that actually ordered the service or the widgets that they purchased, the true customer, and they're the ones that we're actually expecting payment from. So I just put a very, very basic example, some steps here, and really step 5 is probably needs to be expanded out more into the actual steps to create and send the invoice. So someone could easily look at this and say, hey, you have the first 4 steps wrong. And I love that because this is such a broad view of the process. I can easily redefine the 4 or 5 steps to actually access the information, do my 2 or 3 extra steps, and then build the process, build the customer, or send the invoice. So it makes it very easy to decide kind of where to zoom in or refocus very quickly. So kind of some last thoughts as I wrap up this module. When I went through my early days of training, things started clicking to me on how all the various Lean Six Sigma tools fit together. And I've had a lot of coworkers and peers over the years that when they're new to this, they struggle with when do I use what tool and how do they connect. So I wanted to share with you just very quickly kind of how the SIPOC diagram is connected to the value stream. And so I go back to this very high level inputs, process, outputs diagram, and I'm going to strip away the inputs and the outputs, and I want to zoom out just a little bit to look at just a little bit more detail. And let's use a manufacturing example. So let's say I'm painting. This is a paint process that I'm starting with, and you can see I collect some basic metrics like cycle time, quality, inventory levels. Well, the paint process is feeding into another process. Let's say there's an assembly, and we have those metrics, and after I assemble it, let's say I ship it. So before I can paint it, I have to have something to paint. So let's say we're making car parts, say the doors and the sides, body panels of a car and the hood, etc. So maybe I have a stamping process that they're stamping the things that I'm going to paint, and stamping gets their raw material from somebody upstream. So there's a receiving process to get the raw material in. And then I can add in that, of course, we receive the raw material from a supplier, and then, of course, we're shipping out of our facility to our customer. And then in between the supplier and the customer might be our ERP system, where the customer is sending us some type of order requirements that go into our ERP system. And then we can use that same ERP system to forecast and order from our suppliers. And then we can start to add in, are we getting daily shipments from our supplier? Are we making daily shipments to our customer, etc.? And that's the essence of the value stream. And so you can see if I zoom back into any one of these 5 processes, I can then look at the SIPOC level and look at the inputs and outputs and start to create a more detailed view of the process. So just to kind of wrap up this module, I recommend, and I typically, for myself, start with the SIPOC diagram with the team just to keep the team focused at that broad level. It's much, much, much easier to zoom in and get to the detail than the latter and having a team wanting to talk about the 30 or 40 steps, and we get so bogged down in the analysis paralysis, and then it gets very hard for the team to zoom back out. So it's just like going to the doctor. When you go to the doctor, regardless what you're going in for, assuming it's not an emergency room, they're going to start that SIPOC level and just get your weight and your height and your blood pressure and some basic things before they zoom in to the detailed issue that maybe you're coming in for. So we want to take that same approach. So I hope you found this helpful, and an intro to one of the great tools, the SIPOC diagram that teams should use. And this is so simple and fundamental that, in my opinion, you should be able to go create a SIPOC right now on one of your business processes and kind of get started. Thank you.